When you're looking at what your database configuration might ultimately be, obviously you have the choice as to whether or not SQL Azure is going to be beneficial to your environment. We all know that we can host our applications locally, and now we've got the choice to host them within Azure. So there's a number of considerations that can help you determine, should I simply go with SQL Azure? So obviously it depends on the environment, but some things that you're going to want to consider for starters are how the clients are going to be able to access and manage the database. So uh, there are definitely ways to do either. You can access it from within Azure itself. You can use local applications, but it is certainly something to consider. Simply, how is administration going to gain access to it, and how are users going to gain access to the data itself? From that point, are you actually going to implement a virtual server to host the database wherein you'll install your own implementation of SQL Server, and you're just wanting the cloud infrastructure present for easier accessibility? Or are you just going to go with a database and not concern yourself with the server? Let's just go with the database component so that we can remove the responsibilities of looking after the server. And then finally, there's obviously security considerations. So setting up firewall and available IP addresses that are able to access. All those things are considerations, but one of the other things that you're probably going to want to look at are simply which features are available and or not available depending on which choice you go with. So let's have a look at the two side by side. If you are looking at SQL Azure, what you will find is overall, there are certain things that simply aren't available compared to a full local installation of SQL Server. But for the convenience that's supplied by Azure, I think you'll find that in most cases it outweighs any drawbacks that might be present. But for starters, Visual Studio and or SQL Server Management Studio, are you able to use those applications to connect to your database? And in fact, you certainly are. Obviously, we can do that with a local installation of SQL Server, but SQL Azure absolutely does supply the ability to connect to your databases using either Visual Studio or Management Studio. Connectivity, since you are accessing your databases over the internet, obviously TCP/IP is the only option to gain access to those. Local installations can use named pipes, shared memory, things like that. So with Azure, you're limited to just that single protocol. If you are looking to migrate your databases from your on-premise solution maybe up to Azure, you do have that ability, and you can run SQL Server Integration Studio packages, or you can use any kind of script, which might include the bulk copy program or anything like that. So those are supported as well. The only difference with a local installation of SQL Server is you can use an actual backup and restore, which currently is not available through Azure. Agents and jobs, you absolutely can have any kind of scheduled jobs running against an Azure database, but what you need is a local SQL installation to be able to run the jobs, and then they run them against the Azure-based copy. Now, you can still quite easily do this because if you don't have a local installation of SQL Server, you can download for free the Express version, and then you can certainly just go ahead and do that. So they just have to be set up and configured locally, running against the remote target. Obviously, full support in SQL Server. Transactions within Azure, any kind of transaction is limited to the current instance only. It is not capable of spanning outside that instance to another database, and that's just a built-in security feature of Azure. Because it is hosted in the cloud, you don't have as tight a control as what you might have internally. So only within the same database instance, and of course full support with SQL Server. As for collations, only column and expression level within Azure, whereas we can do server and database as well as column and expression for collation. The tables within Azure, you can create them without a clustered index, but as soon as you need to actually write data records into those tables, then you actually do have to define at least a primary key so that there is a clustered index. And clustered indexes within full installations are in fact optional. For security and their usernames, there is no administrators, also root, guest, things like that. Just again, an inherent security feature of SQL Azure, wherein they just didn't want to give somebody the ability to possibly guess common username password combinations. So none of those are available within Azure, and of course you can use any username within SQL Server itself. And as far as T-SQL goes, most of the commands are supported, but you may actually find within Azure certain commands aren't. Now, they have documented which ones don't work, but really what you're encountering are the T-SQL commands that, in fact, have been deprecated for the most recent release of SQL Server. When you have the full product, they've maintained that functionality for backward compatibility reasons. But within Azure, there really is no backward compatibility issues. So a few of those commands that are going to be deprecated shortly have already been done so in Azure. So those are your overall considerations. There's a few others to consider, but ultimately, as mentioned, I think the convenience offered by Azure in a lot of cases outweighs some of the drawbacks.